Special report.
Black holes are one of the strangest things in existence.
Neil Armstrong may have seen extraterrestrials on the moon.
When he spies a discernible shape.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
You can deny all the things I've seen, all the things I've discovered, but not for much longer. Because too many others know what's happening out there. And no one, no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
Welcome, everybody, to Full Spectrum Universe. My name is Rob Yox. We have another incredible show for you this evening. Welcome to the embattled broadcast from behind enemy lines in the once great state of New York. I hope everybody is having just an amazing day and spreading love out there. Before we start tonight, I have a couple of things I want to talk about really quickly. I saw a comment from somebody saying, you know, I call us the Forever Students. And we're going to make a coalition called the Forever Student Family. So it is the FSF or the FS family, right? And FS also stands for Full Spectrum. So it is a Full Spectrum Family / Forever Student Family. We are the Forever Students. We hold each other hand in hand while we walk into this glorious future where we will be in the knowing and of the light. So with everybody here, I want to thank you all for being here this evening. We have another amazing chapter to Galactical Beginnings. This is the fall of civilization as we know it, in the sense of from Atlantis to Lemuria to Mu and the extraterrestrials living in Agartha and all the other places. We will see Earth take shape in the way that we know it is today, right? So from what it was to what it is. And this is also, you know, the past, the present, and the future, but also what's happening right now. There is congruency and correlations everywhere. And another thing I wanted to say, too, is me and Omar were speaking last night, and he said to me, he's like, I love going down the rabbit holes. And I said, bro, if we were in the forest, or he might have brought up the forest, actually. I said, if this is a forest, I'm breaking my ankle every 2 feet because there's so many different rabbit holes in this forest that we've dug for ourselves that it's almost forever. So don't break an ankle. Don't run through the forest because it is filled with rabbit holes, right? Just a little funny quip that I thought we were, you know, me and him came up with together, and I figured we would use it because it's true and we're validated and proven right at every turn. So why not on what we're talking about today and some of the things that we know to be true in our hearts and what we resonate with? You know, this is all frequency-based information. And I say that because when you feel something resonate with you in your gut, you know that there is an underlining something or truth to what you're listening to, right? A lot of this can't be confirmed. Most of it is speculation. But to go through it is to understand what the potential that we used to have, which will give us the potential of what we will have in the future. History is cyclistic, and we want to make sure that we stay on top of what had happened so we can know what is, what was, and what will be, right? So tonight is a momentous evening. It's part 12 of this, and we're not getting towards the end, but I think we probably have about 5 or 6 more episodes of this specific topic. And I'm not sure what we're going to go into next. I know we have a couple of smaller topics that we're going to run into, like the levels of consciousness. We're also going to be doing sacred geometry. I'm producing a smaller video, 5 to 10 minute video of what sacred geometry means, some of the meanings of the symbols, circles, you know, and how mathematics is actually a language within itself. And if we were to meet extraterrestrials from, you know, a different planet, or whether from this planet or somewhere else, we would have to communicate with them. The first thing that they would try is mathematics. Universal numbers are truly the bedrock of what we know as a language. So, you know, there's a lot of really cool stuff to go over. And we're going to be having Paul Wallace a little bit later on, either this week or next week. We've got a lot going on. So with that being said, let's jump right into the information at hand. Another reason why this is so important, this specific chapter, is because of the Great Flood. We see the Great Flood written about in almost every ancient text that we can possibly think of. It is literally everywhere. There's evidence of it everywhere as well. So we know that this is a unifying moment in history when all of the different history books basically either talk about or say one specific instance that they actually know from geological studies, the pyramids, from everywhere. They can tell that this actually happened. So that is the one point in here which we're referencing. We're going to talk about getting right up to that point and how Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu were coexisting, and how things kind of got a little topsy-turvy at this point in the game because of the different influences from extraterrestrial races. So let us begin, right? So the fall of these great civilizations of our time basically culminated in an event that referred to in that's referred to in the Bible and many other religious texts and indigenous stories. It's called the Great Flood or the Great Cataclysm. Wherever you are in the world, it could be different, right? But there's a very long and slow decline over the next 40,000 years that precedes this dramatic desolation of everything. And we're going to go into it, right? So let us go into it. So basically, at this point in time, we're at 40,000 years. It's still a long time ago. And a lot of that time, it was still basically good. Everybody was coexisting. Things were on the up, as in technology and consciousness. Everything was working its way to everybody, right? Everybody was unified and sharing of technology and consciousness practice. So, it has its ups and downs throughout that time, but none of which is that it's so epic that it needs to be talked about until we get to this particular moment, right? And it's a general trend in Atlantis was one of decline in there was a point in Atlantis' history where things kind of turned, right? There was more of a technological advancement and a militaristic and technological sort of cohesion, right? And a less of an exploration of the consciousness and an increase in spirituality, right? That was happening more in Mu and Lemuria. But Atlantis kind of went a different take on it, right? So what happens now, right? There's so much going on, so many different places. We see this all coming together. I think nope, that's the third one. So we see now that things are coming into fruition that will change the course of Earth for the remainder up until right now. So this was mostly due to the influence of the 13 royal bloodlines, who will refer to them from here on out as the Cabal, because it's just easier than saying the Dark Men from Orion or the 13 royal bloodlines. Remember how they got into this portion of time was when they were on Maldek. They used space-time, which is a pocket outside of space and time, to find somewhere in the timeline to reassert themselves where they could potentially grasp hold of that society and use their usual tactics to become to the forefront, right? So the Knuckles and Maya were too strong for the Cabal to simply just take over. So instead, they inserted themselves in society and quietly and persistently worked to their furthering their agenda through creating more left brain technique marvels, which were seductive to the common folk and which influenced the general trend towards valuing technology and craftsmanship over the development of consciousness. So we see a lot of congruency with what's going on today. They have embedded themselves from 100 years ago, and now they're using splendors and technology to kind of make this coercion of the human psyche, and essentially they're programming you with all of their influence via technology, via propaganda, via mainstream everything, right? So we see this happening. This is, again, cyclistic. We see this time and time again. But this is going to, in this particular moment in time, it's going to get to the point of desolation of everything, much like we are right now, which is another reason why this is so important. I'm going to bring it back to me real quick. With knowing that history is cyclistic, we're in this period that's going to be leading up to what Atlantis was towards the end of its time. And it's important to learn how they were flourishing yet diminishing, so we can kind of tip that scale and not end up with the same fate as all what Atlantis was, or Lemuria, or Mu. Because not only did Atlantis leave such a catastrophe that it destroyed itself, it destroyed the rest of civilizations that were spread out across the entire earth. And we're going to get into that. So as we get into it, there were, the Knuckles again were very, very strong. So they faced the Cabal on a political level, I guess would be the best way to put it. But the peoples were sort of kind of drawn to the technological booms that were happening at this time, and craftsmanship became huge, right? We're seeing this so much right now. And but again, the Knuckles were that head position. They were just too strong for anybody to really get a hold of the entire society. So again, just to go over it, they basically went in and took over everything from the structures, and they infiltrated all the powerful members of the Cabal were essentially asserting themselves into prominent positions to make sure that they would never have happen what happened to them last time, right? So also, one more thing before we go forward. After this episode, there is a Watchers Talk Protocols of Saturn episode, which we've been doing. So everybody make sure that they follow the chat, and make sure you click on the link and either go subscribe, follow, or wait for later. It's coming up right after this. So I suggest everybody, jump into that, because it's going to be absolutely epic, as it always is. Omar at Watchers Talk does a hell of a job. And it's actually going to give you a little bit more insight on who these 13 royal bloodlines are, which is why it's so incredible that they coincide with each other. So let's keep going. So, as they have done since the immemorial on this, their inception on this planet, they slowly infiltrated the ranks until they were powerful members of the Cabal, were in all power structures except the inner circle of the Knuckles, right? Playing the game, but steadily working towards their own agenda of control and military might. They also met with the Draco, who were mostly under Earth at this time in Agartha, or a pocket of Agartha, and discovered that their agendas and polarities were aligned. This began the beginning of a long alliance that exists to this day, right? Many people think that the Draco are the Cabal, but they're only merely a part of it. There's more to it. So I'll let Omar explain that a little bit further when we get into it. But it's wild how fast they infiltrated. In only 40,000 years, they were able to take most of the prominent positions among Atlantis. And, all the people that I've talked to that have past life regressions to their Atlantean body talk about this boom in technology. They talk about this playing with things that could essentially destroy the entire world. But, they thought that their science was everything, and it was above all else. So let's keep going. And if you haven't liked, shared, and subscribed, please share this out. We are the Forever Students, the Forever Family. Let us be the ones that bring light to others and share this intellectual information so it resonates with everybody, right? So Atlantis steadily became more and more militaristic and interested in the overseeing of development on the whole globe. And Mu began to isolate itself to protect the more spiritual inhabitants of that land from the corrupting influence of the Cabal's agenda. So now they're aware of the Cabal, and certain cities are doing their due diligence to remain out of the agendas and controls of this specific group of people, right? So over time, the two lands became polarized and divided, and skirmishes and eventually full-out wars began to break out between the two. It's pretty crazy that these two coexisting cities that were basically sharing everything with each other, all of a sudden the Cabal comes in, everything turns to shit, and now people are just firing off at each other and destroying everything, right? So Seeing where this was all heading, and because of the lower vibratory rate that was painful to them, the Knuckles began to distance themselves more and more from third density Earth. They returned to Shambhala, which was still floating above Earth, and two other fifth density bases that they have on on various planets, one of which is Venus. Venus is one of their was where they came from before they came to Earth, or before they got involved in Earth, right? Various higher consciousness groups of Mu and Atlanteans also fled into the Earth and the expanding fourth density Argarthian civilization in order to escape this increased conflict on the surface, which is, most people, they're refugees now, and they're going into these extra places. Shambhala being probably the place that I would have gone to, because the Knuckles were, they were taking in specific peoples, but they truly weren't sharing everything, right? As we keep going. So, well, now we're at 13,000 years ago, and Lil has been on Nibiru for some time and now occasionally visits Earth, where Enki was still in residence. He was basically still there and learning from the Knuckles, yet still trying to become better. He had love for the peoples of Earth, for the cities of Earth. He was growing accustomed to it and truly became part of those communities, right? So one night there was an astronomer, and he informed Enlil that they had discovered that the next time Nibiru passed close to the sun, the trajectories of it and the Earth's orbit would bring the two planets perilously close together, which would undoubtedly trigger massive natural disasters on Earth's surface. And, Nibiru would be affected as well, but it wasn't a very watery planet. So not really, a planet at all, if you remember, but it was a long smoldering star. So, a star basically died out and it became that, right? So it would not be subject to the same type of tectonic effects or resulting water displacement as Earth would be. And, and Lil, who absolutely hated humanity. He hated everything that was, the human experiment. This was music to Enlil's ears. Not only was the world descending more and more into turmoil, but with 21 other races stirring up the gene pool, and with the intermixing of Anunnaki blood with the blood of Homo sapiens and other species, he felt that the Earth experiment had failed. He welcomed this opportunity to cleanse Earth and to start over. And so he forbade his scientists from informing anybody else of this impending calamity, which is, really not okay. He's basically putting possibly millions of people at risk now, which shows that he's just a tyrant, a ruler, doesn't care about what it's going to do. He wants to take everything for himself, truly of the Anunnaki essence, right? We see that. They're not service to others, they're service to self. So Enki, though, he was a scientist as well, and he regularly observed the stars and planets and their orbits from Earth. And so he came to the same realization as Enlil's scientists. But when he communicated his discovery to Enlil, he was dismayed, for his half-brother then placed upon him the same restriction as he had placed upon his own science division. And we see that this isn't really going to work for Enlil, right? I think it's absolutely wild how Enlil being so for the Anunnaki and of the Anunnaki mindset, we see Enki turn, and Enki becoming more of the embodiment of human emotion, showing empathy, showing love, and showing devotion even to these people of Earth who are also part of what he is, but they're also of other species as well. So pretty wild. That's pretty wild to see that this is what would become the embodiment of human emotion, empathy, right? And, a lot of these extraterrestrial races had this same type of Star Trek non-interference pact, right? But if we're on the planet now, right this second, not back then, we have a major interference policy. That's our prime directive, is to interfere and muddle up this cabal's plans or whatever they're doing. It's our job to be the counterbalance of that. So our prime directive is absolutely the opposite of what these extraterrestrial races preach of non-involvement. We need to be involved. We want to be involved. So I'm going to classify that as our prime directive. So when I say our prime directive, it means to share this out, to get this information out to everybody, right? So that I would believe that that's what we need to do, right? So as we keep going, Enki, now very different from half brother, due to all of his time he had into developing his consciousness, loved his peoples and the civilizations of Earth too much to stay silent, right? So he informed the Maya of the impending calamity. Remember, the Maya are not the Mayan Native Americans. They're the priest class of Atlantis. They are the ones that are in between the peoples, the everyday people, and the Knuckles. They're sort of like the priesthood of it, right? So he quietly began to collect DNA from plants and animals of Earth to place these genetic seeds in an ark. And when we mean ark, it was actually a spacecraft, not a boat. However, submersible vessels were also constructed for the people to take refuge when the time came. And the head engineer of that whole project was named Noah. And we see the correlation between the Bible and what we were talking about. Now, remember, Earth is the center of the universe now. It's got the genetic coding of everything across the stars, every animal, every entity. It is an arc planet. So now they're taking these species, and this is one of the things that shows me that this was an arc planet, because they're taking these species, animals, humans, men, everything, and they're putting them into an arc ship when the tidal wave comes to, essentially destroy all of humanity. Everything can be saved. That's how important it was that the entities that resided here of all 21 races thought it a good idea to save everything. Exactly. It's a living library. And that's why Earth to this day is still important, why we are the center of the universe. And that might sound conceited, but it's not. It's sort of the ability to reconstruct the universe. If Earth goes away, then that goes away. If everything is destroyed off the face of Earth, that ability to recreate these entities across the entire stars becomes inert or unable, right? So not only is Earth an arc planet, the arc planet came under siege from essentially weather anomalies. They created another arc to save those species, to save those genetic codings, because that DNA or that coding would later become the paramount of everything, right? Let us keep going. So they constructed the submersibles as well. Now we know it's Noah. Noah is this person who is an engineer, right? Just like when we were talking about Yahweh from the Bible. He was a scientist. He created human DNA. So now Noah, again from the Bible, is protecting human DNA or DNA of the entire universe. Noah is probably talked about on every planet with different names, just like he's talked about in every religion across Earth, right? He's literally talked about, even in Native American cultures, they have the shaman that saved the world, or the hero, right? We see him pop up everywhere because this is a story handed down many word of mouth, many generations. So as we keep going here. So the Knuckles, who already knew about this impending sideswipe by Nibiru and a few high-ranking Maya, also took it upon themselves to start preparing the Earth's and the Earth energetically. For the Knuckles foresaw a looming collapse, not just in civilization, but in consciousness as well. They began constructing sacred temples all over the Earth, mainly pyramids, which they would later use to build and maintain a new consciousness grid should the existing one totally collapse from this, right? Now that is absolutely intriguing. Everybody wonders what the pyramids are for. Why pyramids, right? This is why. It is, this is the time of which the Great Pyramids of Giza were built. Before the flood, which is why sea salt and marine fossils have been found on or in the Egyptian pyramids, fossilized to the walls or the brick, right? Pretty crazy. So there's a reason why all of modern theories about how the pyramids were built are problematic. It's because it's all wrong. The pyramids were actually manifested, a whole and complete in the 6th density by the Knuckles. Then they simply lowered the structure's vibratory rate down to 3rd density, where they then became stone. This is how they were so precisely aligned as well. It's not a problem when it's done all at once. They can do this all over the world because they're running from 6th, 7th down to 5th density or 6th density, which is etherical, and then make it into the 3rd density, which becomes physical, right? Makes a lot of sense to me, So it's wild to think that your thoughts can be constructed in a way on the 6th density to make physical in the 3rd density, right? So we keep going. This was all kept quiet from the general populace by the Cabal, thanks to their far-reaching influence and high placement in administrative and religious offices. Knowing about it before too long, they decided to take their own approach to this problem. They had long ago harnessed 5th density energy, right? We know this. We know that's how they got here in this place and time, because they harnessed 5th density energy and constructed an artificial Merkaba weapon on Maldak that had the power to blast a planet out of the sky, and which had ended up blasting their own planet out of the sky. And one would think that, they might have learned from their previous disaster, but if anything, or if nothing, the Cabal is absolutely arrogant, thinking that this time they could make this, happen the right way. And I think that the arrogance will be their downfall now as well. And we're seeing it happen, play out in real time in front of all of us. When I say real time, I'm talking about in our perceptive field, our perceptive visual field. We see this, we see this happening. So let us keep going. So I know I jumped the gun on the slide, but that's because we're going to get there. So some of the records of this device still remained, and the Cabal scientists were confident that with those documents and their own innovation, they could construct such a weapon again, especially given the Tree of Life energy vortex, which we talked about last episode, that was integrated into the continent, which gave them an easy source of energy to work with. So Atlantis, as Enki and the Maya worked to preserve life and civilization after the inevitable catastrophe, the Cabal worked to avoid it entirely by building a terrible weapon capable of destroying Nibiru before it got too close. Now, I'm going to bring it back to me real quick, because isn't this the truth, right? If we get a gun big enough, or if we get a bomb big enough, we can save everything. And we know that that's not true, because today we have what's called mutually assured destruction, right? We built a bomb so big that if it goes off somewhere else, they're going to shoot a bomb the same size over to us, and nobody wins. Everybody loses. This is not the way of service to others. This is service to self methods, right? And we see that playing out yet again. And it's wild to think about this back then, and also look at how it's affecting now, right? Things are they're out of whack. Our consciousness grid is being tampered with by entities as of right now to try and dumb us down or keep us dumbed down, right? They don't want us to inherently figure out that potential that was from back then, which is why this information is so important, whether it's 100% accurate or 20% accurate. It's showing us the potential of us, of who we are. And that's the important part to take away from it, right? That's what I think. I mean, that's just my perception. I want everybody to tell me what they think in the comments. That's why we're doing this completely crowdsourcing and sharing this information so everybody can look at it, make their own discernment out of it, and bring it back to the collective so we can get a more robust understanding of all these different perspectives and how this is actually playing out, right? So let's keep going. So again, we see that they're trying to destroy Nibiru. On Mu, the people were prepared in a different way, forewarned by the Knuckles and by others with consciousness that had developed enough for them to see through time. The people of Mu began to move their settlements from their coastal areas that they'd always inhabited up into the mountainous region of Mu, and also into the underground civilization of Agartha. Now, the Mu would later become the Aboriginals, and we talked about that in the last episode. So we see how this culture is going to survive catastrophe, right? Because this catastrophe is coming. Make no two ways about it. It's who's going to survive and who's not going to survive now, right? So now we're at 12,500 years ago. And the best way to sum up the cataclysm would be to say that just about everything that could go wrong did. It all went wrong. And this is where we start to see the bending of values, or the bending of what is potentially possible, to try and move into survival mode. And this is also going to give you a tell, and you'll know it when you hear it, of why it's such a dark versus light battle today. We're going to see things come into this particular Earth field, and we'll get into it. I don't want to give too much away before we do that, but so, there has been intermittent war between Atlantis and Mu for almost 1,000 years at this point, and both lands had suffered tremendous damage. So before the imposing flood, most of these cities had been damaged through war. So the Knuckles sensed what the Cabal was up to and had urged the Maya caste, which is the priests, to take action. But the Maya were to their necks already, trying to preserve life on Earth in the face of this impending calamity, right? Collecting and preserving DNA strands and overseeing the construction of vessels, as well as making contact and negotiating with various inner Earth groups to make sure that their peoples could go there. They sent some priests to check out the activity in the Cabal sector, but if the Cabal were ever good at anything, it was keeping a secret, right? They kept under our noses for how many years before we actually figured out what the plan was. They're really good at this, right? So, the Knuckles turned to the warrior caste of the Lumerians, the Lumerian people, and implored them to launch some special op missions into the Cabal labs to try and sabotage the development of the weapons, which they did, right? And this is just a note here, but though they had made exemptions in the past, the Knuckles were generally hesitant to take sides or influence in any way. So, what gives this outright encouragement of an active war? You would think to yourself, right? We know that the Knuckles are a 5th density, 6th density, 7th density people. They usually don't interfere in that way. They only got involved when the Anunnaki decided to genetically manipulate Homo sapiens, and then the adding of all those other cultures. They were coming together to try and build, not break down or disparage, right? They weren't sure if it was fate or destiny. And we went over that in the last episode too. But, they were desperate. That's why they did this. They see the probable timelines, and almost all pointed to something very bad happening. But not just for Earth, but for the whole of creation. This is what I mean by Earth being the center of the universe. Because of the importance of Earth, remember, it holds a major piece of the divine feminine balance of the entire galaxy, right? That's why we call it Mother or Gaia. It's paramount. So not only is it holding genetic codes that can be reproduced, which makes sense if the mother is the divine feminine and has the seed of all these different races on it, it can be bore to be made again, you would know that this is a divine feminine planet. This is the divinity of the femininity is Earth, Gaia, and we symbolize that every which way we can, right? We know it to be true. We feel it. So let us keep going. You know, the raids were partially successful in that they did manage to slow down the Cabal's plans, but they were massively unsuccessful in another way. The Cabal used the attack on their labs to stir up outright rage among some of their militarily minded factions of Atlantis, whom they had been allies with for thousands of years already, and basically used this incident as a pretext for stirring up war between the two continents, which is why things start to go really downhill, right? So, amid secret preparations for sustaining life, mass migration of the people in Mu, development of a secret weapon by the Cabal, and a giant planet heading basically to almost sideswipe the entirety of Earth, now there was warfare in the mix as well. Even some nukes were used by Atlantis, which began to destabilize the entire geographic region of the continent of Mu, right? And we're going to go into why that is. So, what happens to Mu as a continent, which would be the Southern Pacific Islands, or Hawaii, or Guam, or the Philippines, possibly even Japan, is all a part of what Mu used to be, right? So as Nibiru gets closer, the effects of the planet begin to be noticed on the tides, and the Cabal turned to their planet killer or their missile of some sort to destroy the planet. And this is where things get really, really bad. They get really, really bad. So now here's the thing about this kind of technology. It's very unstable. It's dangerous. It takes precise calculation and instrumentation, the most refined construction, and attention to detail. The Cabal scientists were very good, but it had been in their time about 50,000 years since they had last built something like this. They never attempted to construct such a device in third density. They were in fifth density last time when they built this specific type of device. They were working from fragments of old plans, and in their pride and vanity, not only did they not think that about their limitations of understanding, they never even thought that there might be crucial holes in their plan. They also didn't realize that because of the energy grid, they were tapping into the power. Their machine had been created solely with consciousness and love, this tree of life, and this machine that had been built to predecess this, right? It would not be good vibratory match for their creation, because the earth was living on such a high level of consciousness and love. Making this type of weapon is not congruent with that vibration. That vibration is going to set it off, right? And that's which was intended to destroy when they're building, right? It had worked out okay in the lower energy testing phases, but when they turned the thing and cranked it all the way up and preparation for fire, things went sideways very, very quickly, right? First, there was a massive earthquake which destroyed much of Atlantis and began its slide into the ocean. Now, this is where I personally sort of differ from what has happened to Atlantis. I don't believe all of Atlantis sunk into the sea. I think the main center pod of Atlantis, the main center circle, took off, and they were utilizing geothermal energy at the time that when the next thing I tell you about happens, it causes complete panic and complete disarray on the planet. But let's keep going. So, basically, this is the destruction of everything. And it destabilizes Atlantis, and it began to slide into the sea. It even reached as far as Mu and destabilizing the continental plate even more after it's already been shot through war and everything else, right? So we see some other things start to happen here. Nibiru's massive magnetic field then began to push the Earth's magnetic field, beginning a shift in the magnetic poles, right? Upon seeing this, obsessed with their objective and secure in their own personal safety, the Cabal fired upon Nibiru. They shot it off. They shot this weapon off. And the resulting devastation didn't harm Nibiru at all. The energy of the weapon didn't even make it past Earth's upper atmosphere. It totally wreaked havoc on Earth. Most of the rest of the Atlantean cities were immediately destroyed as a result of this physical explosion. The continent sank beneath the sea. And because of the nature of the technology involved, the explosion was not just physical, it was metaphysical, right? A rift was torn open in creation. And the creatures of the void, which we talked about in episode 1 and 2, the Azurus, were let into our plane of existence. This is what we know as the Archons of today. They were immediately attaching themselves to the energetic fields of whoever were around. The Knuckles, who were having a busy day to say the least, managed to send most of the parasitic energy back to its plane and close the rift, but the damage had been done. And this, my friends, is where we get to what we're seeing today play out, right? The demons had attached to members of the Cabal and to common citizens of the sinking Atlantis. It was now a part of their energy field and could not be easily or quickly pulled out without destroying or severely damaging the host. Think about trying to pull a tick out of a chunk of flesh. Will it come if you're extremely violent and you're yanking it out, the chunk will come out with it, right? If you're very, very gentle and careful and with the right techniques, it's the same as with the Azurus. They can be removed, but it's a delicate procedure. And the Knuckles had their hands full with so much more at this time, the coming devastation, right? So this is where we see the Archons or the Azurus, whichever you want to call them, they're essentially the same beings, come into fruition in the third density, which results in the NPCs we see walking around today, whether they're NPCs or whether maybe they're malevolent spirits, right? Malevolent, nefarious, and they're existing in these bodies the same way as the Atlanteans and some of these Cabal members had their bodies taken from them in such a manner, right? So this leads to some pretty crazy stuff. The way that the Cabal experienced that energy attaching was a rush of increased power. They were already aligned with this vibration, right? So it wasn't much to them. They just grew stronger. The common folk, though, and that strength gave them the ability to maintain dominance for thousands of years, right? And the common folk, though, they experienced that energy as an increase in survival, terror, and the pervasive negative thought loops that mostly vibrated hostility and a sense of I shouldn't exist here, and so neither should anything else. Many were driven mad with terror and turned violent. And we can see that this is getting absolutely insane now, right? Many people were affected by these demonic energies and the imprints and negative thought emotional loops that they established in the etherical field and psyche are still around us today, right? And we see that. We see that happening. This is why we do the work that we do to expose this. And essentially, when we're exposing and shining light on these darker areas. We're doing it to become hip to the game so we don't get stuck in those emotional loops. We start to take control of our subconsciouses back and really transcend that energetic loop that they have us on. And when we talk about NPCs, these are these vessels without souls or without consciousness. They roam because these entities can jump in and out of each of them as they need them. They're chess pieces. So the NPCs are a part of this etherical field or this loop of bodies that these entities can consume, take, and do whatever they wish in. They can use them as, places to reside, or they can use them as basically the negative energy from these entities feeds these archons. It feeds the Azuris. It gives them their ability to be as demonic as possible, right? So as we keep going, but all of that was just the beginning of the cataclysm. Then the poles shifted, right? Where you see north and south was essentially east and west, was where N was, and north was where east and west are. It flips. Things flip. Not a complete pole. It was a 180 turn. So that's why we see places like Antarctica that didn't have any ice or continents at the time, right? The magnetic intensity of Nibiru's proximity not only nudged the Earth's magnetic field out of whack, it also heated up the interior of Earth, and the mantle liquefied to the point that the Earth's crusts became slippery. So when the poles suddenly and dramatically shift, so did the continental plates, causing the Great Flood, right? That's what we're seeing. So giant tsunamis, thousands of feet tall, ripped all around the globe. And not only that, there were such severe and bizarre weather phenomena that some places, including Atlantis, were flash frozen. Even as they submerged, the island of Mu were completely wiped out, and much of the continental plate that held up this island of Mu sank into the ocean, just like Atlantis was doing. So when it was all over, the globe basically looked like it looks today, or the Earth that we're familiar with, right? Which is, it's wild. It's wild to see how things just happen like this, and what we go through to make who we are today, right? But many people did survive. The Lumerians, who had migrated high into the mountains or deep under earth, and the Atlanteans, who had made it into submersibles. And after the earthquake, the Ark survived as well. It carried the DNA of most of the plant and animal life of Earth, and it also carried the highest ranking members of the Maya, and some of who had ascended to the honorary Knuckle status, right? They would play a huge role in helping to clean up the mess and to reestablish civilization later on. So we had lived, if you had been alive during that time, most of us who had reincarnated from that time, we had lived during the Golden Age, a great multi-density civilization focused on creating beauty and developing our sciences and consciousness. Now, after the cataclysm, most people left on the surface were living in survival mode, driven by desperate circumstances and invasive Asuric energies. We regress to a more primitive and tribal existence, which is, you see, the tribes of Africa, the Aboriginals, the Native Americans, some of the Nordic places. These were all tribal entities after this, right? There were some exceptions. Those who had made it to Agartha would continue to thrive and develop underground. Some settled in existing cities, and others were given permission to build their own, right? So we see things happening here that are just absolutely insane. Many of the tribes of Mu had fled to the mountains and preserved their ancient wisdom and lived in peaceful cultures in the islands of the South Pacific and in the areas of South America. Though some of these folks also fell prey to the Azuric energy, which started to encourage dark religious practices involving human sacrifice. And then there were the Knuckles in Shambhala and the Maya group in their art, floating above Earth. So, but there was also the Cabal, most of whom had survived and even had their dark energy increased by the Azurus. They rode out the cataclysm in their enormous ships, which would now be buried in the ices of Antarctica. And this is actually one of those ships that we see right there. And the general vibe of fear and survival, which permeated the Earth after this great plunge in civilization and consciousness, was an opening for them to step fully into the power, which is where they have been ever since. That's where they've been ever since. So this is where we see the ups and downs. Next, we're going to be going into a little bit of Greece and Rome and how they played a role in trying to, effectively stop the Cabal. But again, it would be very, very long time for people to even awaken to the fact that they were still around. You have to understand that when all this catastrophe happened and all these people split, they wouldn't come together again for many thousands of years. So they built up their own cultures, right? And their own cultures forgot about their ancestral heritage between each other. They became their own standalone civilizations, most of which didn't have, some of the South Pacific islands didn't have contact with outside people until the 1950s, World War II, or, almost to Vietnam. It's crazy. That's crazy how that happens. That's wild. But we see things start to separate now. Religions are built, polytheistic, monotheistic, things start to change. It wasn't a global civilization anymore. And like I said in the last episode, we strive to get back to this place of a global civilization, but in the right way, in a consciousness-based global civilization, not an oligarchic tech-based civilization, right? We all want to come together. We all want love and peace and prosperity. But we have to basically get rid of that Kabbalish tendency or these etherical fields or these cyclistic loops of emotional-based lower vibrational energies to get to that point. And that's why we do shows like this. Because even if it's only for an hour, even 45 minutes, to release ourselves of that lower vibratory emotional feelings shows some solace in the sense that we can get there all the time now. We can move our way up to that fourth density, that fifth density, and reside there permanently. And we can really get back to basics and know who we are and what we are, and see that it's all in our fingertips. It's all in our minds, and we can achieve anything, right? So that's the end of the presentation this evening. We'll be back in a couple of days. We're going to have it probably in 2 days, and we'll come back with another episode. We'll do part 13. And let me know what you guys think in the comments below after we're over. Also, please leave a comment. Share this out again. I love to hear feedback on these episodes because this information is mind-bending and super powerful if you really if it really resonates with you. Some people it may not. Some people are ready for it, some people aren't, some people agree, they disagree. It's all good. It's all good. I love to see all the different comments and how people interact with it. Remember, we are the forever students, and we are the ones that we've been waiting for, and the information is the activation. I said all three of the monikers really quick, right? So we can get out of here tonight. Remember, after this, go to Watchers Talk. Protocols of Saturn is happening right after this. And, we're going to really, really jump in to some of the more symbols. Omar's going to jump into some of the more symbols of what you're seeing every day and the families that now reside within these 13 bloodlines and how they've changed everything. Right? So with that being said, my name is Rob Yox. Love one another, pass it forward, send the information out. If you know people who are on the cusp, it is our duty to enlighten those people and spread and share the light with them. It is our absolute duty, right? the Forever Student family, the Full Spectrum family. We're here for each other. You know, everybody knows how to get a hold of me if they need anything. And we can do this together. I have full faith in us. I have full understanding and full absolute knowledge that we're making it out on the other side just tremendously, tremendously better. So with that being said, I hope everybody has an amazing evening. Thank you.